So now that you can see why overfishing is such a bad thing, this last lesson talks about how we are working to conserve our marine ecosystems, especially in regards to overfishing. So fisheries managers use surveys, fish population studies, and monitor catches to regulate the timing, scale, and techniques used in harvest in order to do their best to not be overfishing. And the goal that they're working towards is to establish a maximum sustainable yield for each fish stock and not to exceed that level. Now, you may remember that term maximum sustainable yield from when we talked about timber logging. And so the goal there is to harvest at the maximum growth in the S-shaped curve. So that's that exponential growth in the middle. And that way it grows back the fastest. The problem with the fish, as it was with the trees, is that this means keeping fish at about half the level it would normally be at. And basically what happens is they collect this data and they see that if the current yields are unsustainable, they may limit the number or biomass of fish that can be harvested. They might restrict the type of gear that fishers can use or close the fisheries altogether. And the estimates that they take of how much they can catch and how much there is might be imprecise and can change. So for example, in 2008, a North Atlantic cod survey off the coast, the Gulf of Maine, surveyed its estimated biomass at 34 million kilograms. So then they set their standards on how much they could fish based off the fact that there was 34 million kilograms of North Atlantic cod in this body of water. But then they did a survey again, and they realized that it was actually only at 12 million kilograms. And so they knew that they hadn't overharvested in those 3 years, and so they realized that they must have made a miscalculation back in 2008. And they assumed that that happened because they based it off of a few trawls of fish that were brought in, and they assumed that they must have just been unusually large trawls, and so it was a estimation. But then they immediately lowered the quotas after that to reference the new estimated biomass. And considering impacts of fishing practices on habitat quality, species interaction, and other factors that may be indirect or long-term effects on populations are considerations that they take as they do this. Because despite these efforts, fish stocks have continued to crash, and this suggests an ecosystem-based management system is needed. This means that focusing on not just keeping the fish numbers up, but maintaining the ecosystem. That way the fish numbers can't come up since everything in the ecosystem is interconnected. So we're going to talk about marine protected areas, which are areas that restrict human activities like drilling, but allow fishing and other extractive activities. And they are meant to protect the unique and biodiverse areas in the ocean. About 3% of ocean waters are designated as MPAs, but this doesn't really, MPAs are still very overharvested. There's a quote in your book that MPAs are dredged, trawled, mowed for kelp, crisscrossed with oil pipelines and fiber optic cables, and swept through with fishing nets. So the MPAs are not really doing very much. So we're looking for another option. And another option we're considering is what's called marine reserves, which were areas of the ocean where fishing is prohibited. And so this is designed to preserve ecosystems and improve fisheries. Commercial and recreational fishers dislike this because obviously they can't fish there and they are looking to make money or to catch their fish if it's recreational. But scientists argue that they can serve as production factories for fish for surrounding areas. So basically, if we protect this one piece of water or this one geographical area of water from fishing, the fish there aren't going to be caught, obviously, but the fish there are going to lay eggs, and those eggs are going to disperse because of the currents of the ocean. And so they're actually going to help build up the number of fish numbers in other areas as well. Now, doing these in setting up these marine reserves, you have to be culturally aware. So, for example, in 2006, George Bush established the Papahanaumokuakea Marine National Monument around the northwestern Hawaiian Islands, and basically this was a marine reserve that is larger than all of the U.S. national parks combined, which is an interesting note, but also reflects how much larger the oceans are than the land. And that made all fishing illegal there, except for Hawaiian natives. So it didn't remove the rights of the native Hawaiians to fish on their land, but now they are there's no commercial fisheries, only like private ownership or private individual fishing of the native Hawaiians. An opposing example would be the Chagos Archipelago, which is an island chain in the Indian Islands that is controlled by the United Kingdom. So in Samir, the indigenous people of this island were forcibly removed between 1967 and 1973 so that the US could build so the US could build a military base there. And so something like 4,000 people from this island chain have been fighting to get their rights back. But the UK has made this a marine reserve, and so they have banned fishing there. So these people are worried that once they're allowed to go back, they're not going to be able to fish and they won't have any livelihood. The UK has said that the needs will be reassessed should they win their rights back, but it's just an interesting example that we have to be careful that sometimes fishing is a like a cultural native thing to the people that live there, and to be sensitive to that. But despite the fact that there are fisheries and recreational fishers that don't like this, it's considered a win-win for both sides because of the fact that then we're allowing the fish to come back and they spread out. So a 2001 data review of a bunch of different studies that had looked at these marine reserves revealed that marine reserves on average provided the following benefits. So a 23% increase in species density, so the amount of species in one area, a 91% increase in organism density within the reserve, a 192% increase in total biomass, a 31% increase in average organism size. So those are really good numbers. That 192 increase in total biomass, that means that things are bigger and there's more of them. And that's good because remember that it's not just the number of fish, it's also how big they are. And as we catch all the big ones, we start fishing down the food chain like we talked about. Sorry, we have a visitor. And mortality and habitat damage have also been reduced. So that's really good. We're leaning more towards the ecosystem approach instead of just the species approach. And the larvae of species inside the reserve, so the eggs and the young of these species that are allowed to live inside the reserve, seed the seas, meaning that it's like we're sprinkling seeds of organisms out into the ocean when they spread out to areas outside the reserve. And these numbers were found all these numbers were found after 1 to 2 years of establishing the marine reserves. So that is pretty good. And so then the last thing is how to best design these reserves. That way we get the most out of them. It's a complex decision because you need to it impacts the recovery rate of the organisms within, as well as we're balancing the needs of the commercial fisheries to earn a living and to feed the people. So a small reserve may fail to protect the animals as they can easily get out and get caught. But a large reserve is too protective because the spillover of the larvae and of the young outside of the reserve that then could be fished outside of it's not big enough. So medium reserve is that low Goldilocks fit where we're still protecting lots and lots in here, but we're still dispersing outward and seeding the seas around it.